I figured I'd give you a story about some mistakes that I made over the weekend, but what I'd like to talk about is Cursor 2.0 and its new model, which is called Composer 1. Just want to talk about a little bit of the UI changes and some different ways that you can use it that I think honestly had been released before, but I hadn't really touched them until I saw this new release. I've been in Cloud Code for quite a bit, but it seems like a lot of these IDEs are coming with maybe agentic or agent manager views or different ways of essentially managing multiple processes that are happening at once in a similar vein to what you might do in Claude Code by running sub agents. So I got into some trouble this weekend, Jason. I got to be honest. I wiped a ZFS RAID array that I had made because I figured I would vibe code some maintenance to it, and things did not end up so well. Luckily, I recovered it, so it's a pretty cool story. But I want to talk a little bit about how I got there, maybe, and why I felt so confident, and talk a little bit about some of the changes in Cursor 2.0. So they had a big announcement. This was the 29th, so about 5 days ago now. And the biggest thing is there's a new view here. So there's an IDE view, and I'll zoom in a little bit, my apologies. So there's an IDE view, which a lot of us have seen, but there's also a new agents view. And you can see this is a little bit different. On the left-hand side, there's some agents here running, or they could be running. But also on the top, you can see that there's 3 models running at the same time. So you can actually assign things to up to 3 models in either normal or max mode. And then you can compare those results, or you can have it compare the results for you, and then go from there. It's actually pretty cool. It uses Git work trees, which is good because that's a pretty common foot gun, is to do a lot of stuff in your Git repo and then have so many changes that you can't push them back to main. It becomes a bit of a chore. I feel like this is the right step forward. The other thing is, you can see that it's got the 3 there. The other thing is that you can run some of these sessions in cloud mode now as well, which again, used to be able to do before, but I want to go over what that looks like as well. So we're going to talk about cloud mode first, and then we'll hop into the CLI, and then we'll come back to the IDE if that's okay. And I'll talk about sort of some of the mistakes that I made over the weekend. So in this agent view, you can do things like look at your repo. For me, I was just doing some like offline stuff because it has web access. So it can go through and analyze the things that you need or things that you may be working on, that kind of stuff. So I felt like the cloud tasks were really good for maintenance or sanity checking. We were talking about API key rotation and security, that kind of stuff earlier, setting up security accounts or maybe rotating keys for them, that kind of stuff. It felt like the web view, at least for me, was more like that. What I've heard of is maybe you would start a session, say, in the console, and then maybe pick up from WebView in another location. I've yet to really do that, even though I do work both at home and at the studio sometimes. I feel like most of the time what I'm doing is starting things in Cursor and then completing them in WebView sort of later because they're tasks that can run at the same time. So let's say, for example, you've made this new app, you've vibe coded it, you've created a front end, a back end, but you forgot to do documentation. Those kind of tasks, even though I think both of us would agree should be done as you go, if you've not done them and you have to do them after the fact, that type of work stream can run alongside your coding, or at least that's what I've been doing. Similarly, things like security checks or dependabot alerts or dependabot PRs, I feel like those can also be done sort of on a side channel or in different repos or maybe different branches starting out in different repos or work trees, as we're saying. So essentially separating up that work so it doesn't affect what you're doing. So that's kind of what I use the web interface for. But I also want to talk about the CLI interface because it's also quite handy. Now, again, I'm asking a very similar question. So what is next to do in the repo? But in case you've not seen the CLI, it looks like this. And I mention this because I feel like this model, the CLI quote unquote model, this command line model, is very common across all 3 of these apps. So it feels like this is the new paradigm, and this seems to be what's driving all of them. And I could be wrong, but that's what it feels like. It feels like this UI is sort of the standard UI now for Cursor. Sorry, my scrolling's a little bit sketchy because I'm still in the VM. I've decided to take Rory as a device, and I've been putting everything into VMs as I can, or Docker containers, just because I'm trying things that are a little bit more, let's say, risque. If you're going and doing RAID maintenance on your NAS, for example, maybe something that I want to be able to track and log. Okay, so we talked about the web view, which is good for those tasks that are kind of, maybe you want to resume them later, or they're tasks that can happen outside of your normal work. We talked about the CLI, and I feel like this is maybe more for when you're automating things, or if you want to have something like return a JSON, or only give you markdown files for this step of your N8N workflow, or maybe Node-RED, or maybe using some other workflow system. system. It feels like that kind of tool. So you can use it as an automated, maybe like evaluator in your loop, or answer a question answer in your loop. Or sometimes, you know those BPMN, I think it's the diamond where you have to make a decision. Maybe make some of those decisions for you and keep a decision log. But the meat of what I want to talk about today was Cursor. And I'll talk a little bit about the model that I was using first. So it's called Composer One. So if you go into here and turn off auto, you'll open up Composer One, which I believe is the default now. And listen, this is a great model. I've yet to have any problems with it, aside from over the weekend, I was going through and asking it to do some maintenance. I asked this model, I'm sorry, I'm personifying here a little bit, but I to the prompt, or in the prompt, I said, please create a new mount point in ZFS. Now, a mount point in ZFS would be like a share in Samba. So it's not like it's a new folder. It could be a new folder, but it's more a new mount. So it doesn't really do much to the array. So I thought it'd be safe. What it did, though, was erase my array and create a new volume, which are two different things. Not the end of the world. And I realized that the training corpus for ZFS might be not as good as it is for other RAID arrays, but I think there's a fairly big difference between the two. Now, in Composer's defense, I like, listen, it made the mistake, but immediately what I did was swap over to Sonnet 4.5, which again, you can do through under here. If we go into new agent, and you can pick another agent, so Sonnet 4.5. And you'll see that some of these have brains on them. And I didn't really think I needed to go big brain mode because I figured ZFS repair should be pretty easy, but you can also do that multiple models thing here. So if you want to go to Sonnet, GPT, and Grok as well. So what I did was I swapped over to Sonnet and I said something similar to, I think we still got all the data. You've rewritten the headers on 5 disks instead of 6. Sorry, it was 4 disks instead of 6, which is good because I had 2 disks left. And then I got to repair the headers, essentially, and then go block by block and make sure the rest of the blocks have been untouched, because it only written about 1 gigabyte across 4 disks. That's about 255 megs. Sorry, 250 megs across all 4. It's not that bad. Full disclosure, I recovered the array and I was able to lose, I only lost about 40 gigabytes of data, which I did have on other NASs. I do a lot of storage research. I don't know why I still like storage, but I do actually have a few network attached storage systems at home, so I was safe. But I guess this is a cautionary tale. When you're doing maintenance, make sure it's a tertiary device that's backed up, et cetera, et cetera. But I was able to get myself out of the mess. So we'll talk about how that happened. So I used Sonnet 4.5. It actually didn't take long. I think I shared to you the chat history. It was in 2 or 3 prompts. The repair took 20 hours, I think, to actually take effect. But in terms of the actual fixes required, it took about 30 minutes. It was pretty impressive, actually, because if I had to do that on my own, I probably would have tapped out and asked a friend, because it's fairly difficult to do things like, I think it's the NV tables headers on the disk that were missing, required a custom tool, etc. But using Sonnet 4.5 and then using this work tree under here is how I ended up doing it. Now, I didn't use multiple models. Again, I only used Sonnet 4.5, but I did manually specify it. So I know that these are a little bit confusing to see under here. Like there's different modes. There's agent, which is you're going to be doing things. Plan, which is you're just going to make a plan but not do anything. And then ask when you need a simple question answered. The other under here is you can add context. This has been here for a while. You can connect to a browser, same thing. You can upload an image, so a screenshot of what have you. All I did was just paste in the ZFS error codes. But this has changed a little bit on this left-hand side. So this one here is kind of what I want to point out. And that cloud is what we were using earlier in the cloud. Now, for some sessions that I've got running, so you can run 8 of these at once. You can have many different chats, but in terms of the ones that are happening synchronously, that would be 8 of them. Or in parallel, I suppose you should say. Okay, so here's my first caveat. So I'm not sure if you noticed when you upgraded to the new version, but it lost all my chat histories. Not a big deal, but it seemed to be a pretty common problem, so I figured I'd point it out. It is in GitHub. There's a few different tools that you can use. It's a SQLite database in case you have to recover it. I ended up trying to go in and grabbing some of that ZFS session just so I could show you that it did in fact really happen, because it felt like one of those stories that was too good to be true. The fish that you didn't catch was massive, sort of thing. But going through these, what you can do is see that for each of these answers, if you pick the one with 3, you can click on each of these and go through and see what the answers are. So again, all I did was say, hey, for this repo, what are the next steps? In this case, it's saying, look at Swift Rust integration. That sounds pretty difficult. Next one here is making sure that we name things properly and actually, fair enough, do what we said we do in the repo, which is fair. This is my vibe coding slop repo where I put a bunch of stuff in. And then you can see here that Grok actually just completed. So Grok was the slowest of the three. So if you want to evaluate the three or evaluate three models, you can easily start them off and see which one's faster, which one gives you a better answer. But in this case, you can see that it's got like, there's some bootloader fixes and things like that. This is more like some VM experimentation that I was doing, similar to our chat last week. All right, the other is for each of these. So this one's cloud, and I'm not sure if you can see that little icon. I know it's tiny, but there's a little cloud here when I mouse off it. And this one is a work tree project. This one, unfortunately, looks like it had an error probably hitting the web. But in this case, the work tree would actually put all of your work in a different GitHub work tree as opposed to a branch. So it's like a clone of your repo in a subfolder. So there's not a lot of risk essentially involved. And then for the rest of these, I just ran like one prompt and they come back pretty fast. You can see there was in fact a connection error. I'm on a VM, so chances are that was the case. And then environment ready. So if we pull up the web, we can actually see that one of these in here, this one here, was actually the same session as what we were just looking at. So that Claude session, or sorry, that code session that we had up and running in Cursor is actually the same on both the Cursor UI as well as the web. And then from here, I can pick which answer I want and go from there. Okay, so long story short, I was using Composer 1 in the new Cursor 2.0 launch. I thought the model was quite good. I definitely broke some stuff on my RAID array that I was able to fix, on the other hand, using this. And so breaking it's pretty easy. The fix, I would say, is actually fairly complicated. And one of the things that I really liked about Cursor that I've always liked is that it tends to do continue by default. So a lot of the times the model will get to a point and it says, what would you like me to continue? And obviously I just want to, copy paste. Yes, please continue. That's the whole goal of this. What Cursor, I find, will often do is continue that conversation for you for a while, actually. And in fact, even though I put in a few prompts to fix it, as I showed you, a lot of the work that was being done was just me sitting back. I think I was drinking a coffee and watching it work while sweating a little bit, hoping they could recover the data, assuming I had a copy, but still, you never want to lose data by mistake. So I was just watching it as it went, and it went through a bunch of different prompts. I think it went through 10, 11 iterations of things that it thought it should fix, and then second guessed itself, and then tried other things. Came back to me a couple times for some tips or pointers or other ways to do things. Made a really good point, like you should probably make a copy of the array before you continue, but I didn't have 24 terabytes sitting around to make copies of these binary disks. So I just said, YOLO mode, let's go. Like, I'm pretty sure I got a copy. Let's see what we can recover. And it went from there. So long and short, I think Cursor, for me at least, is a tool that I don't use as often as I used to. I think I started off in probably VS Code, then went to Cursor, then to Windsurf, which is similar but not the same as Cursor, and then I ended up using Claude Code for a while. So that's kind of my journey, and I figure it might be time to go back to Cursor to figure out if they've implemented some of the things that I like in Claude Code, and it looks like they have in terms of being able to run synchronous tasks. It also looks like you can sometimes trigger sub-agents to do the work for you, which is great. That's one of the things that I really like in Cursor, but I haven't been able to do that all the time in Cursor, unfortunately. And I will say the Composer 1 model, though new, is pretty good. It's not as fast, and based on the failure that I saw, I'm a little bit more hesitant to use it for serious things. But if I want like a quick answer, that would definitely be what I go for. It just feels like the corpus is a little bit smaller, perhaps, than you might have in Sonnet 4.5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got similar experience with it. It's definitely different. 2.0 is just a different IDE from the previous versions, and all this for all the reasons that you just shared. But then so many more too. And I've found myself coming back to it on some projects. Really, curiosity is part of it, but also just to see, like, are they reaching parity, feature parity with some of the other things like Claude Code? Sub agents is a big I think element of that. It sounds like it's like AI in general, it can cause a lot of chaos and catastrophe, but it also can do some serious heroics too, and maybe like repair what it did. It's funny that it feels like we were kind of drifting into, even though I know in this scenario, it's an array, hard disk array, storage. It's still at the bit level, right? It's still at the software level. But we're starting to get at the edge of like the, tinkering with the hardware is basically like how I think of that type of stuff, even though you're right there at the header, so you're still at the bit level. But I have definitely not explored that part of the vocabulary of LLMs, and I agree. It just
Right.
doesn't have enough. There's just not enough data, I guess, on it. But there should be, I guess, whatever data there is, it should be pretty straightforward. Like there's a right and a wrong way to do those.
Right. And we've heard from clients who are running their own LLMs internally because they're running different languages, essentially languages that you won't see out there. So it's not TypeScript, it's not Java, it's not JavaScript. It's more like I'm trying to think like Lambda expressions written in just different languages that we don't see. Like Smalltalk, for example, is one of the ones where people still use it, but in terms of the corpus that's going to be in there, maybe not so much. Or OCaml, I think, is another one that a trading firm uses, and they'll define languages in OCaml, but that's definitely way out in left field. It's not going to be part of the corpus. So they're training it up basically on their internal code to go from there. The other thing is the hardware side. One of the first things that I tried was Verilog. So being able to do FPGA code. So describing a circuit in code and then running through that circuit to see if it works. It failed pretty hardcore. Maybe that's something that I should revisit though, because I do have a couple of FPGA devices here that I can try out with. But I'm very interested in, like you said, those edge cases. So one on the hardware side, like how close are you to the hardware? Can you play with it? Can I plug in an Arduino or Raspberry Pi and play with headers? But on the other hand, also the languages. We're reaching the edges of the common languages, even the sort of tertiary languages. Now we're into the really esoteric languages. But still, it feels like there's no reasoning here, but it still feels like that prediction of what's next is still useful in cases where the corpus may not be the same, but it's similar enough that the just essentially predicting the next word is enough to actually solve a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you so much for the early observations for Cursor's latest IDE. And yeah, all great stuff. And we'll look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks, Jason.
See you.